Let's go ahead and bring in Paula Reid, CBS News Justice reporter, and Leslie Sanchez. She's a CBSN political contributor and Republican strategist. So thank you both. First to you, Paula. So he addresses loyalty, this former FBI Director James Comey. He also addresses letting the Flynn probe go. Are there any legal bombshells or smoking guns in these remarks that the president made to James Comey?
Legally, there's no smoking gun to prove that anyone committed obstruction of justice. And it's important to note that when Comey details here in his opening statement his conversation with the president about Mike Flynn, he specifically says that he believes that the president was referring to dropping the investigation against his friend and colleague, and that it was not Comey's impression that he was trying to get him to back off of the entire Russia investigation. And legally speaking, that's going to be key. Any good defense attorney could use Comey's interpretation of that specific conversation to try to tamp down any allegation that there was obstruction of justice. Now, for the general public, there's a lot of new information in here. It is very interesting. It lays out a pattern of their interactions. And from the get-go, it seemed that the first interaction the president had with the former FBI director, the former FBI director felt a need to memorialize what had happened in those conversations, something he had not done with President Obama, and he did that throughout. But ultimately, this will really be a he said, because as we learned from this opening statement, it was just the two of them for most of these conversations.
And it really does seem like he was uncomfortable, James Comey, as we have heard from reports. Based on that, in that second page, he's actually saying, this had not been my practice in the past to actually take copious notes, yet he felt compelled to do so. What do you think that says, Paula, about his level of comfort being alone with the president?
Well, clearly he was concerned. He said he personally felt uncomfortable, but I think if you know James Comey, you know there's something larger going on here, which is he was concerned about the impression that the public would have about the independence and the integrity of the FBI. That was one of his sort of central priorities when he was leading the FBI. We know that, of course, also from the way he handled the investigation into former Secretary Clinton's private server. In order to protect the integrity of the FBI, he held a press conference to explain his decision not to bring charges to the general public. Now, yes, that was a case of enormous public import, but really what he was trying to do was protect the FBI. Again, when he sent that letter to Congress a few days before the election, he was trying to prevent that from leaking and in any way reflect poorly on the FBI. And here again, it seems he is very uncomfortable that perhaps the president is looking for a friend and not an independent FBI director.
All right, Leslie, let's bring you in. Based on Comey's remarks here, what do you expect lawmakers to focus on when they get a chance to question him?
Sure. They're going to spend a lot of time trying to determine whether he felt, and what Paul is alluding to, the pressure. It's one thing to say, why don't you go ahead and drop that investigation? I don't really think there's a lot there. It's another thing when you overlay that on the number of times he's talking about his job. Do you like this job? Are you going to continue to remain in this job? There's 2 or 3 instances where it's a repetitive question where there could be this type of political pressure, and that's really what they're alluding to. Did he feel that? Whether or not he responds to that question, I think is going to be something else. But what's interesting about what Paul is saying, and it goes back to protecting the independence of the justice system, and you've seen that consistently with Comey, whether you liked him or not. It was all sparked by the meeting Bill Clinton had with former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and that the illusion that optically did not look good. It jeopardized a bias or a prejudice on their independent investigation. That, again, I think is going to have some bearing in terms of his credibility, both sides of the aisle, and did he feel political pressure to stand up and do so?
Paula, Comey will say that he tried to get the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, to interfere so he was not alone with the president. Is this an instance where Sessions is at fault for not doing any more?
What's really interesting is I think that this opening statement kind of absolves Jeff Sessions of a lot of responsibility for this, because while Comey asked him not to leave him in the room alone again, it's clear Comey never really briefed Sessions on what was being discussed, what the president was asking of him. Now, reasonable people could assume that he did not disclose this because Jeff Sessions is an ardent supporter of the president. He was one of his sort of closest advisors, most senior cabinet members. But Comey also says in his opening statement that he believed that Jeff Sessions was probably going to recuse himself from the investigation and that was specifically why he didn't clue him in. But I really think this opening statement, it's actually great for Jeff Sessions because it shows that he really wasn't looped in on exactly what was going on and kind of absolves him of any part in this.
All right, let's shift this a little bit, staying with the Russia probe here, but talking about the Senate Intelligence Committee today. There are reports that the president asked the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, to interfere with Comey and the Russia probe. He and NSA Director Mike Rogers were asked about that during a hearing today. Let's take a listen.
In the 3+ years that I have been the director of the National Security Agency, to the best of my recollection, I have never been directed to do anything I believe to be illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate. And to the best of my recollection, during that same period of service, I do not recall ever feeling pressured to do so.
I have never been pressured. I have never felt pressure to intervene or interfere in any way and shaping intelligence in a political way or in relationship to an ongoing investigation.
All I'd say.
So, Paula, we know by seeing Comey's prepared remarks that he's going to be pretty forthcoming tomorrow. But is there a legal basis for these intelligence leaders to refuse to answer questions about their conversations?
No, and I think Coates sort of alluded to that at one point. He was asked, is there a legal basis? Is there a legal reason you're not answering these questions? And he, to paraphrase, he says, I'm not aware of any legal basis. And it is truly shocking that these men would not have gone to the White House counsel's office and gotten a definitive answer on what they could and could not say. Now, at least one of them said they had reached out to the White House but had not gotten an answer. But truly, this hearing had a lot more questions than it did answers, specifically on the issue of things that had been discussed between these men and the president.
Absolutely. Leslie, jump in.
Yeah, even as the Republican, and you saw the consistent theme that came out of there was Republicans and Democrats were both extremely frustrated at the lack of forthcoming nature and responses. You can make an argument. Reasonable people could say their intelligence community, they said or alluded to the fact they would give more information in executive session, kind of behind closed doors. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you basically didn't get a lot of answers out of them today.
It did feel a little bit like they were all sort of using a similar talking point as well. I did not feel pressure from the president to do one thing or the other.
And that's kind of implying what we're talking about with Comey. Was it alluded to that perhaps you would no longer be in your position, that your job was at stake, or there were some other ramifications? And it was that type of pressure for one reason or another to either stop an investigation or to look in a different direction.
All right, our next bit of big news today, Paula, this coming as the president announced his pick for FBI Director over Twitter, Christopher Wray. What can you tell us about his background?
Well, Mr. Wray, he worked at the Justice Department for about 7 years, first in the state of Georgia in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then he came up to the Justice Department's headquarters here in Washington, where he had a number of different roles, culminating in running the criminal division. Now, I know we're all super focused on Russia today, but it's important to remember the Justice Department has a very broad portfolio: white-collar crime, cyber issues, terrorism, civil rights. And it does seem like he got a lot of experience, particularly in criminal matters, while he was at the Justice Department. We've talked to a lot of people who know him or who knew him, and they describe him as a cautious guy, a conservative guy, someone who's careful. Someone even described him as being vanilla. But overall, people who don't know him yet within the FBI have told me, you know what? We'll take it. This guy seems a lot better than some of the other names that were floated.
Right. And Leslie, he is not an elected official. So what do you think his chances are of being confirmed?
Very high. You know, this is a vanilla folder, you know, like very Manila. No big disruption in selecting a candidate. It's going to have a lot of toxicity around them is a very important move. We're trying to stable the ship. And I think a lot of communicators, whether they are inside or outside the administration, would tell you that's really where they need to go.
All right,
Safe.
Leslie Sanchez and Paula Reid, thank you so much.